She thought she had it all: a beautiful family, a loving husband, and a new life in the countryside. But behind closed doors, a web of deception was being spun, one that would destroy everything she held dear. This is the story of trust shattered, a marriage betrayed, and the devastating cost of deception. Her name, for the purpose of this true crime, is Cynthia, a woman of intelligence and warmth, driven by her work in the medical field and devoted to her family. She was 30 when she reconnected with an old love, a man who had once held her heart but had slipped away with time. When they found each other again, it felt magical, as though the universe had always intended for them to reunite. He was charming, ambitious, a man of quiet confidence, the kind who walks into a room and owns it without needing to say a word. He had built a life for himself, a business, a home, and in her heart, Cynthia believed she was walking into a love story meant to last a lifetime. 9 months after their reunion, they were married, and soon after, Cynthia carried their first child. But every love story has its setting, and this one was far from the familiar streets of the city where Cynthia had grown up. The house stood 4 hours north of the city, a place meant for peace, but one that would soon become a prison. Cynthia had always been a woman of connection, drawn to the rhythm of urban life, the hum of conversation, the simple joy of meeting a friend for coffee. Here, there were no cafes, no sidewalks filled with people, only open land, stretching endlessly in every direction. She had moved here for love, to build a life with the man she adored. But in doing so, she had left behind the very essence of herself. At first, she ignored the gnawing loneliness. She focused on their growing family, on making the house a home. But with each passing day, the silence pressed in a little harder, the walls closing in a little tighter, and then came the first sign, the first whisper of something just beyond her reach. A woman, she was his secretary, a local woman, deeply embedded in the community, as at home in the countryside as Cynthia felt foreign to it. At first, she seemed nothing more than a passing presence, someone who answered calls, managed schedules. But soon Cynthia noticed the way her husband spoke about her, casually but often, more than one might expect. She dismissed it. She was a professional woman, after all. She understood workplace dynamics, trusted her husband. But something about this woman unsettled her. It was in the way she looked at Cynthia, amused, as if she were an outsider in her own life. The way she smirked when Cynthia struggled with tasks unfamiliar to a city girl, fixing a flat tire, navigating the rough terrain. A harmless friendship, he insisted. A working relationship, nothing more. Yet Cynthia found herself awake at night, the shadows of suspicion creeping ever closer. Her husband's father had done the same thing once, left his wife for a secretary. And history, she feared, had a way of repeating itself. But each time she voiced her unease, her husband met her with dismissal. You're overthinking things. She's good for the business. Your insecurities are the problem, not me. Gaslighting, a term Cynthia had never needed before. And yet, it was now wrapping itself around her life, suffocating, distorting, making her question what she knew to be true. She tried to push it aside, for the sake of their children, for the sake of their home. But doubt is a parasite. Once it takes hold, it does not let go. It was 2020 when the world changed. The fires came first, sweeping through the land with ruthless hunger. Then the pandemic, forcing them all into their homes, into isolation even deeper than before. And in that solitude, Cynthia began to see it. The subtle shifts, the small betrayals in the way he spoke, in the way he turned away when she entered the room. The secretary's presence grew, not just in his business, but in their lives. A voicemail, a familiar voice, light, teasing. Tell your wife I say hi. A nightmare, she thought. But perhaps, more than that, a premonition. She had always known, somewhere, deep down, she had always known. What began as love had become something else entirely. She had built a life on trust. Now that foundation was crumbling. But the worst was yet to come, and soon she would find herself standing at the edge of a betrayal she could never have imagined. Would you have seen the signs? Cynthia had never been one to doubt herself. She was precise in her thinking, logical, steady. Her work in the medical field had required it. Precision was everything. But now, in the quiet moments, she found herself hesitating, repeating things she knew she had said, rereading messages, checking the time, questioning whether she had imagined an entire conversation. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was something else, something deeper. Her husband's presence had changed. He was still there, but not in the way he had been before. They would sit together, yet it felt like he was somewhere else. He would reach for his phone mid-conversation, glancing down, his expression shifting before he quickly put it away. Cynthia noticed the patterns. The phone was always face down. Notifications were silenced. If she entered a room unexpectedly, the screen would go dark with a tap. Once she had picked it up absent-mindedly, a reflex after it vibrated on the table. Her husband was beside her in an instant. "Don't touch my phone!" His voice was sharp, his body tense. Cynthia felt her stomach turn. "Why? What's on it?" He exhaled, forcing a laugh, shaking his head. "See, this is what I mean. You're paranoid." She wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't paranoia, that a man with nothing to hide wouldn't react this way. But the moment had already been turned against her. It would happen again and again. Each time she voiced concern, her husband would flip the conversation, making her question herself. "You always do this. You're pushing me away with this nonsense. You're acting crazy, Cynthia." The words clung to her, crazy, a word she had never associated with herself before. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the house. The girls were napping. The silence pressed in around her, heavy, stifling. She moved through the house, her mind troubled, retracing every step that had led her here. On impulse, she walked to the bedroom, pulled open his wardrobe. The scent of his cologne drifted toward her. And then something unfamiliar. A crisp white shirt tucked behind his usual clothes. She ran her fingers over the fabric. It was new. Cynthia frowned. He had never mentioned buying new clothes. Her mind flicked back to the week before. He had left early that morning, told her he had a business meeting out of town. She had asked if he wanted to take lunch, but he had refused, saying he would grab something on the way. When he had come home, she had asked how it went. "Good," he had said, barely looking up. No details, no elaboration. Now, staring at the shirt, a sick feeling settled in her stomach. That night, as they sat at the dinner table, she brought it up casually. "Did you buy a new shirt?" He barely hesitated. "No." A direct lie. Cynthia felt her chest tighten. "I saw one in the wardrobe." He sighed, shaking his head. "Jesus, Cynthia! You're looking through my stuff now?" The tone was deliberate, not one of surprise or guilt, but of exhaustion. Cynthia faltered. She hadn't been snooping. She had just noticed. "I wasn't looking. I was just... Do you hear yourself?" He scoffed. "You're acting completely unhinged." There it was again. Crazy, unhinged. Words designed to make her question herself. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist she wasn't imagining it, but she could already see it wouldn't matter. He had set the narrative, and the more she protested, the more she would prove his point. She forced a small laugh instead, shaking her head. "You're right. I'm overthinking." She saw the relief in his expression. Later that night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she whispered the words to herself again. "I'm overthinking." The doubt had settled in now, a parasite feeding on her confidence. About the secretary, Cynthia had tried to ignore her. She had told herself it was nothing, that the discomfort she felt around the other woman was just a symptom of adjusting to life in a small town. But then there were the comments. Subtle, passing remarks, spoken with a smile but carrying an edge. "It must be so hard for you coming from the city. I guess we're just used to doing things ourselves out here. I could never sit behind a desk all day. I need to be doing something real." Cynthia wasn't naive. These weren't simple observations. They were meant to make her feel small, lesser, out of place. Her husband never defended her. If anything, he laughed along, shaking his head in mock amusement. "You know, Cynthia, she's not really the hands-on type." The words stung. It wasn't about the work, the lifestyle. It was about the way he spoke about her now, like she was something separate from him. The secretary had begun to make herself comfortable in their lives. She was always around. Cynthia had been hesitant to bring it up again, but one evening, as they lay in bed, she gathered her courage. "Do you think it's possible to be too close to someone you work with?" Her husband didn't look up from his phone. "What do you mean?" "Just that sometimes boundaries get blurred." He smirked again. "Jesus, Cynthia, you really need a hobby." He said it lightly, But the message was clear. The conversation was over. Psychologists describe gaslighting as a gradual process. The victim doesn't wake up one day and suddenly doubt themselves. It happens in increments. A comment here, dismissal there, a shift in tone, a repetition of the same phrases until they become ingrained. Cynthia had entered this marriage confident. She had known what was real and what wasn't. Now she wasn't so sure. Her thoughts tangled in themselves. She caught herself hesitating before speaking, second-guessing whether a moment had really happened the way she remembered. She had begun keeping notes in her phone, small things, details of conversations, times and dates, proof in case she ever needed to remind herself what was true. One evening, she overheard her husband speaking on the phone in the other room. His voice was low, his words measured, then a pause, a small laugh. No, she has no idea. Cynthia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her chest tightened, breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward. He turned, saw her, and hung up immediately. For a moment they stared at each other. Then he sighed, rubbing his forehead. Cynthia, please, don't start. The conversation ended before it began. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't sure how much longer she could convince herself this was all in her head. Time passed, and Cynthia had learned to ignore the feeling. The unease, the unanswered questions, the moments that didn't add up. She had buried them beneath routine, beneath the need to keep her family together. But some truths refused to stay hidden. It was late one evening when the final thread began to unravel. Her husband's phone sat on the kitchen counter, screen glowing with an incoming message. She wasn't looking for it, but there it was, a single line, standing stark against the darkness of the room. I miss you already. Cynthia felt her body go cold. For a moment, she could not move. Her pulse thudded in her ears, drowning out every sound around her. The world had narrowed down to that message, to the undeniable proof that everything she had feared was real. She picked up the phone, her hands shaking. The message was from her, the secretary. The weight of it pressed down on her, crushing, suffocating. Cynthia had spent months questioning herself. Now, she had an answer. Her husband entered the kitchen then, his footsteps casual, his presence so ordinary that for a fleeting moment she thought she had imagined it all. But the phone was still in her hand. She turned to him, holding it up, her voice quiet, unsteady. What is this? For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Something quick, something calculated. Then, the shift. The same shift she had seen before. Jesus, Cynthia. His voice was exasperated, tired. You're reading too much into things again. A script, a rehearsed deflection. He reached for the phone, but she pulled it away. She misses you? Her voice was shaking now. How long has this been going on? His face hardened. You're acting crazy again. The words struck her like a slap. The same words used so often, so easily. But now they no longer had power over her, because this time she had proof. The next day she left the house. She had no plan, no real direction. She only knew she needed answers. In a town this small, people talked. Cynthia had spent years feeling like an outsider, and now she saw the looks, the way conversations stopped when she approached. At the local grocery store, she ran into a woman she barely knew, one of the wives from the community. The woman hesitated before speaking. Cynthia, are you okay? Cynthia opened her mouth to answer, but something in the woman's expression made her pause. It was pity, a quiet, lingering pity. You know, don't you? The woman's voice was gentle. Cynthia stared at her. Know what? There was silence, a shift, the kind of silence that held too much weight, too many unspoken words. And then softly, everyone knows. It was the final blow. Cynthia felt the room tilt around her. She had spent months trying to convince herself that she was imagining things. But the truth had been out in the open all along. The day of confrontation of the secretary finally came. She didn't remember driving there, only that suddenly she was outside the secretary's house, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She stepped out of the car, her heartbeat a hammering rhythm in her ears. The door opened before she had the chance to knock, and there she was, the woman who had dismantled her marriage piece by piece. She didn't look surprised. Cynthia stared at her, trying to understand. You wanted my life so badly, didn't you? The woman shrugged. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, She turned away. Cynthia felt something inside her snap. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about everything. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the way she had been made to feel like she was losing her mind. The secretary had taken something more than her husband. She had taken Cynthia's certainty, her confidence, and now she wouldn't even acknowledge what she had done. Cynthia wanted to scream, to force her to look her in the eye, to admit to the damage she had caused. But there was nothing left to say. The woman had won, and Cynthia was done fighting. People who cheat often rewrite reality to suit their own needs. They don't just deceive their partners, they deceive themselves. By making Cynthia question her own mind, her husband had allowed himself to believe he wasn't doing anything wrong. And by the time the truth came out, the damage had already been done. Studies show that emotional betrayal is one of the most devastating psychological experiences a person can endure. Over 60% of people who experience infidelity report symptoms of PTSD, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, sudden emotional breakdowns. The body reacts to betrayal as though it has been physically wounded. Cynthia felt the weight of it in the weeks that followed. The exhaustion, the fog of disbelief. She had spent years building a life with this man, and now, in the space of a single moment, that life no longer existed. The time fully came, and Cynthia made a decision to leave. The hardest part was the children. Her daughters adored their father, and yet he had chosen someone else. Cynthia packed their things in silence. Her husband didn't stop her. If anything, he seemed relieved. She expected pain, grief, but instead she felt nothing, because the man standing in front of her was not the man she had married. She had been fighting for a version of him that no longer existed, or perhaps one that had never existed at all. What happens next? The aftermath of betrayal is not just the loss of a relationship, it is the loss of self. The woman Cynthia had once been was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who had survived. But at what cost? Cynthia left in silence. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no final confrontation. She gathered her daughters, packed what she could, and drove away from the only home they had known. The road stretched before her, empty, endless. The weight of it all sat heavy in her chest. The betrayal, the deception, the months of being made to feel like she was losing her mind. But now there was no one left to tell her she was imagining things. No more deflections, no more gaslighting. For the first time in years, Cynthia was alone with the truth. Her daughters sat in the back seat, quiet, their small faces pressed against the window as they watched their world fade behind them. They did not understand the full extent of what had happened. Not yet, but they knew enough. They had seen their mother cry in rooms where she thought they could not hear her. They had noticed the absence of warmth in their father's voice. And they had sensed, in the way only children can, that something had changed. Cynthia drove for hours before reaching the new town, a smaller home, a different life, a place where she could start again. But escape did not mean freedom. The struggle was far from over. For years, her husband had been the kind of father who would have done anything for his children. He had been present, attentive, a man who lifted them onto his shoulders, who sat with them at bedtime and traced letters with his finger in the pages of their storybooks. That man no longer existed. Cynthia had expected distance. She had expected him to choose his new life over the one he had abandoned, but she had not expected him to stop trying. At first there were phone calls, short, emotionless, a quick check-in, a forced conversation. Then the excuses. I've been really busy. This week has been hectic. I'll see them soon. Soon became later. Later became silence. And then the worst of it. The realization that it wasn't just neglect. It was something more deliberate. The money stopped. At first it was small things. Missed payments, vague explanations. Then the legal documents arrived. Her husband was refusing to pay child support. Then came the custody battle. In cases of infidelity, courts rarely punish the cheating spouse. A judge does not weigh betrayal the same way a heart does. The fight for custody was not about morality. It was about legalities, documents, arguments laid out in cold, clinical terms. Cynthia had assumed it would be straightforward. She had been the primary caregiver. She had moved for the sake of the children's stability. She had done everything right. But there was one factor she had not accounted for: The new woman. She was in the courtroom that day, sitting beside Cynthia's husband, her posture straight, her expression composed. She was not simply an observer. She was involved. Cynthia had expected her to stay in the shadows, to let the legal process unfold without interference. But there she was, speaking on his behalf, providing statements, describing, in practiced words, why it would be detrimental for the children to be separated from their father. She spoke with confidence, as if she had not been the cause of this entire ordeal, as if she had the right to dictate how Cynthia's children should be raised. Cynthia sat across from her, staring, trying to comprehend how a woman who had spent months tearing a family apart could now sit in a courtroom and pretend to care about what was best for those children. The judge listened, took notes. Cynthia waited for the moment when someone, anyone, would turn to this woman and ask, "Who are you to speak on this?" But no one did, because in the eyes of the law, affairs are not a crime. Cynthia had expected a fight. Instead, her husband sat there, silent. The man who had once fought for everything now seemed content to let someone else do it for him. His new partner spoke more than he did. She made arguments, gestures, claims about the future. Cynthia's husband only nodded along. That was when Cynthia realized he had handed over control. This woman, the one who had taken her husband, now sought to take her children's future as well. And he was letting her. The outcome, Cynthia won primary custody, but it did not feel like a victory. The court ordered visitation rights, though her husband rarely used them. He missed weekends, skipped scheduled calls. The children stopped asking for him. One day, her youngest daughter said it without hesitation. "I don't think Daddy wants to be our daddy anymore." Cynthia wanted to argue, to tell her that wasn't true. But she couldn't, because she wasn't sure if it was. Cynthia had always believed in love, even after everything, even after the betrayal, the gaslighting, the months of waking up with an ache in her chest that never seemed to fade. But belief and trust are not the same thing. She had spent so long trying to piece herself back together, trying to be strong for her daughters, trying to be someone who wasn't defined by what had happened to her. Yet, there were moments, quiet, unexpected moments, when the weight of it all still pressed down on her. The hesitation before answering a message from someone new, the way her body tensed at the sound of a familiar notification tone, the instinct to question kindness, to search for the hidden motive beneath every affectionate word. Betrayal does not simply leave, it lingers. And then, one day, she met him. His name was Daniel. He was not looking for love. Neither was she. Yet, somehow, their paths had crossed at the exact moment they needed each other the most. Daniel understood things she did not have to explain. He had lived his own version of loss, walked through his own kind of pain. He, too, had been left behind. A marriage that had crumbled, a wife who had found comfort in the arms of someone else, a custody battle that had drained him of more than just money. It had drained him of hope. And like Cynthia, he was a parent first. A father to 2 children who had once believed in the permanence of family, only to learn that nothing was guaranteed. There was no grand cinematic moment between them, no instant spark, just conversations. Quiet, easy conversations. A growing comfort in one another's presence. It was the first time in years that Cynthia did not feel like she had to defend herself. The first time she did not feel the need to explain why she sometimes hesitated before trusting. Daniel simply understood. Love after betrayal does not return in the way it once existed. It is cautious, wary. It moves slowly, hesitantly. There were nights when Cynthia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was capable of loving someone again without fear. But Daniel was patient. He did not push. He did not demand certainty where there was still doubt. He simply stayed. The first time she told him about the gaslighting, about the night she had spent questioning her own reality, he listened. Not with the kind of pity that she had grown used to, but with something else. Recognition. The quiet understanding of a man who had been told the same lies. It was in that moment that Cynthia realized he wasn't just someone who had also been hurt. He was someone who had survived it. And so together, they moved forward. The first time Daniel's children met her daughters, there was a moment of hesitation, a pause in which 4 children, all too familiar with change, studied one another with quiet curiosity, and then acceptance. A shared understanding that none of them had asked for this new life, yet here they were. Fate, coincidence, or simply the reality of children who had learned far too young how to adapt. They did not ask questions about the past. Instead, they played, ran through the house together, created their own laughter, their own version of family. For them, the past did not matter, only the now. Cynthia was happy, genuinely, undeniably happy. But happiness does not erase memory. She still had moments of doubt. The instinct to protect herself had not faded. There were days when she would catch herself waiting, waiting for the lie, waiting for the shift, waiting for the moment when it would all fall apart again. And then Daniel would reach for her hand, a small gesture, a grounding one, a reminder that not every love story ends the same way. Yet, even in the warmth of this new life, one question remained, a question that had no simple answer. Can someone ever truly heal from betrayal, or does it change you forever? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for your audience.